Hello, everybody. My name is Andre Robinson. I'm CEO of the Robinson Group. We primarily do community development, and I'm really happy to be here with my esteemed colleague here, my brother from another mother, Nasar Abadey, and we're having profound conversation.
Profound Conversations is a listening and dialogue space which brings foremost thought leaders into a conversation to grapple with the vexing challenges of today's world. Welcome to another episode of Profound Conversations.
Are you still teaching?
Well, I still teach. I'm uh, I teach at Peabody
Okay,
Institute of the Johns Hopkins
sure.
University up in
Right,
Baltimore,
exactly.
and I've been there maybe 17 years, and I teach jazz history, jazz combo, and jazz
Mm,
percussion, and um, it's been quite a
sure.
reward for me to be there, working with young people. But of course, where I am, there are only a few people in any of my classes who look like
Hmm.
us.
Mm,
So we know what we're dealing
sure.
with there, with
Right.
there. So, but my goal is to give everybody the tools to do what it is they want to do eventually on their
Hmm.
own. I give you the tools and make sure you understand that the origin of this music comes from
Sure.
Mother Africa.
Right.
That's
It's
I have to
essential.
start there, especially in
Sure.
jazz. Essential, essential. And once they
Hmm.
understand that, then they, especially in jazz history, they can start to understand what are the reasons for the shape of
Right.
America now, why we are in this shape, and what their parents and grandparents and forefathers and mothers did to make sure that this idea of white supremacy
Sure.
continues. And so they start to see, and they bring it back to me. They start to see things that they could not see
Mm.
before because all that they saw before was what was
Right.
presented to them as, as this is
Fact.
what black
Right.
people do.
Exactly. That's got to be very rewarding. That eye
That is
opening when
reward.
you see someone, you see that light come on. That's the most amazing thing in the
Exactly.
world. As a matter of fact, now that you mentioned that, you might be able to help me with a personal project. My grandfather on my father's side was a gentleman whose name was George Robinson, and George Robinson used to
Okay.
organize the bands for Duke Ellington when he came to DC. He played multiple
Ah,
instruments. He would play
okay.
banjo,
He was the,
violin.
he was the
Yes,
conductor.
yes. He played banjo,
Okay.
violin,
Okay.
and a few other things. But there's very little that I've been able to find about what he did. So because of your background, you might be able to help me track some of that down.
His name was
George Robinson,
George.
yes. But yeah, apparently he was the contractor for Ellington when he came to DC, and I think he used to play. You know, the Lincoln's notoriety was not because of the theater; it was the colonnade right in the back. So the dance bands used to
Oh,
play in the back of the. It was an underground place that went down the side of the theater, which we didn't discover until later on. It was like had been filled in. It was a swimming pool or something like that. They put in there. They say filled it in,
oh,
but it used to be a place called the Lincoln
oh.
Colonnade, and it was where the dance
Yeah, I
bands used to
remember
play.
that.
It was at the Lincoln Colonnade. The
Ah,
Howard was where people went to listen to music. The Lincoln Theater
okay.
upstairs was a movie palace. That's why there's no obstruction. There are no columns in there. If you remember the Lincoln, it's
I
all open
see.
because it was really a
I
movie
see.
theater. Um, and so I'll find out a little bit. You know, we have bits and pieces of it, but I would like to know a little bit more
Okay.
about
I'll see if I can get
what
some
he did
information.
and what his influences may have been, because it's just a lost part of our family's history that I'd like to find out.
Tell me, Andre, what is it that you do? Please share with me what is it that you do.
It is a little confusing. My work primarily now focuses on something that is kind of a little, it seems a little wishy-washy. It's community development. And I kind of moved into that arena primarily from doing what's known as creative placemaking, right? My experience has been built on building galleries or revitalizing theaters, or actually revitalizing neighborhoods.
Wow.
I started with the Lincoln Theater in Washington, D.C. about 35 years ago. And what I noticed in doing like 6 or 7 other theaters or galleries or restaurants in other cities is that inevitably they became richer and whiter, and the local community just got moved out.
Yes.
So that kind of weighed on me, like, how can we change that platform so that the community is prepared while they struggle through the lean years to be
Yeah.
there in place when the revitalization, quote unquote, happens without moving them out. And
Yes.
it's a longer term approach. It's not as immediately lucrative, like, landlords like to get in, take rent, and then all of a sudden whoever can afford it will move in right after them and inevitably just move the local indigenous population out. So,
Okay.
so that is really the center of my work, is really trying to root communities which are almost always in, either urban areas or areas that would be considered like undesirable, that are
Yes.
suddenly like, oh, this is right near the water, or it's right near downtown, and then they just come in and just wipe the slate clean and kick out everybody who used to live there, and they don't benefit at all from the
Yes.
upside.
Yes.
So we do a deeper dive by trying to get into local communities, into schools, into neighborhood associations, and so forth and so on. And um, it's a lot of groundwork, right? Groundwater work. You're trying to really improve the local conditions the um, before the contractors move in other words, so that folks are prepared to either to get some of those jobs, which can be quite lucrative. But if you're
Right.
not prepared for them, what happens is they bring in people with the right skill sets, and those people get moved out. So we're trying to do that a little differently. So my work right now is primarily concentrated on Baltimore City. I'm from Washington, D.C. originally, and it's just no longer chocolate, right? But when it
It's
was chocolate, people didn't want
vanilla
those
square.
neighborhoods.
That's right. That's right. So
They
I
abandoned
remember
them.
that. I remember that because when you mentioned 30 years ago,
Right.
I remember I've been here 45 years from Buffalo, New
Hmm.
York.
Okay.
And I remember when that whole U Street corridor was being regenerated.
Right.
And the Lincoln Theater, of course, and the Howard Theater, those two theaters being in that community was very important,
Sure.
integral to that community. And one of the things that I'd like to say about it is
Mm.
that several times I performed at that theater. I
Mm.
had no idea that, of course, you were a part of it in terms of renovating it and bringing it up to snuff so that acts like mine could come in there
Sure.
and perform. It's a very nice space. But like you said, first of all, the city had it, and then
Hmm.
the city gave it over to um, what's that concern? They I think they may even still have it. They had a place around the corner, um, a hall that was a radio hall.
Right.
Remember that place over on Sherman and
I
was that
know
Sherman?
I'm trying to remember who you're talking about, but I know because it moved through several hands before I was brought in by the board, because I'm somewhat of an expert in rebuilding theaters, and
Uh-huh.
but even when we were there, when you're wrestling with a city-owned property, they're struggling because they don't really even go to the theater. So how do
Right.
these things operate, right?
Right.
Um, and so just long, drawn-out conversations with people who are the vice president of conversation someplace else, and
Yes.
trying to explain to them how things really work. And they're like, "Well, you don't understand. I'm the VP of, who the hell are you?" And so, when you're younger, you kind of work with that for a little while. But as you start to get a little grayer and you've earned all these gray hairs, then you're like,
Right.
well, I appreciate what you're doing. Like, I wouldn't come down there to tell you how to do things down at your office. You really
Yes.
might want to consider listening to experts. And sometimes those experts are in the community. They're the people
Yes.
who were sitting in those seats when they were children, and
That's
they
right.
knew all the acts, and they understand why that wallpaper is important, why it's cheaper certainly to scrape it off and just get something else in there. But it was restored somewhat lovingly, and it was a struggle, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
when we were working on it, it was nobody really but us and Ben's Chili Bowl. Nobody else was open but us and Ben's Chili
That's
Bowl.
right. That's right.
Um,
Right.
and I'll never forget it because once we started to get up to full speed, I mean, they brought in, I don't know if you got the guy that used to run the Warner Theater, Sam Lahamadou. They
I've
brought
heard.
him in to run it for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't really know how to program it. But I'm
Uh-huh.
sitting there putting like 1,200 people in the street every night, right? And they're like,
Wow.
well, what do we do next? Where do we go to eat? And
Uh,
some
okay.
people can eat at Ben's Chili Bowl, but not everybody can. So I just watched all these people year after year after year go to
Yes.
Adams Morgan and spend that next $100 up there. So you're
Yes.
like, wow, we don't have any restaurants. There's nobody, no,
Yeah.
nobody here. But although he was roundly criticized, Marion Barry forced them to move that district building to 14th Street.
Yes.
And there was a pizza parlor on the ground
That's
floor, and that was the only other place to eat down there. And then eventually,
right.
Busboys and Poets comes in, and then
That's
boom,
right.
boom, 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 boom. You watch it change over time. They were already drilling the subway, so we knew eventually
That's
that
right.
neighborhood was going to be
It was going
transformed.
to be
But
commercial all the way.
all the way, but the houses in the neighborhood was selling for like back taxes,
Yes.
$10,000 or so.
Right.
All of our folks had moved out to PG County, so they're like, I'm not trying to be down there.
Right.
It
Right.
took me
Right.
25 years to get out of that neighborhood. It was like, brother, you're going to make a mistake. This brother's going to be at work in six
Yes.
minutes. You're going to have a 66-minute commute if you're lucky
Yes.
from Bowie or wherever you were. But
Yes.
you can't
Yes.
tell people how to spend their money. So it's
That's right.
so once I went to Harlem and then Newark, New Jersey, and other places to do the same thing over and over again, you're like, please, people, that place that you're denigrating right now is only that way right now because it hasn't been invested in. And if you
Yes.
don't invest in the young people in that neighborhood, they're not going to understand the value of it either. So it's a longer term, it's a more arduous approach, not
Yes.
always lucrative, but it's worthy at the end of the day when you see folks being able to participate in the upside. So it's a long-winded answer, but that's kind of sort of
That's a good
why
answer.
it's a community revitalization, not just doing buildings.
Well, that's a good answer. One of the things that concerns me the most, and that I started to understand
Mm,
about that subject, is that, like what you're doing, it lends itself to the thought of, well, why don't we become involved? When I say we, I mean the Africans American become involved in the process,
right.
so that our communities, well, if we decide that we're going to invest in our communities, then that means that our communities will deliver the best that it can for us because we have hands on.
Hmm.
That will mean that our needs and our desires will be dealt with in terms of the political makeup of downtown
Hmm.
of the mayor of the mayor's um, staff and political system.
Sure.
That's the way to go. But most African Americans do not understand it to that extent because the first thing that happens is the majority of us, and not only African Americans, but people who work a lot for other people and don't think about the terms of working for themselves,
Hmm.
those people become a part, their thinking becomes lack. In
Yes.
other words, I don't have, so
Right.
therefore I can't do.
Right.
And the idea of attracting wealth and attracting opportunities to grow wealth and develop wealth
Hmm.
means that if you have the positive attitude and the positive outlook about it, it will seek you out. It's an attraction. And I'm happy to know that you are still involved in this work and that you have the mindset that you do, because that's what we need in order to turn it over. And that doesn't mean that we have to own it outright. It means that we have to have control, as much control of it, because
Sure.
we live there. So that means that other ethnic groups can participate as well. But we want to be a participant in the sense that we have the say, a lot of say about what goes on in our community.
Absolutely.
And that doesn't mean that we have to move out of our, or be moved out.
Right. Or be moved out, more importantly, because a lot of times I think our voices are not centered in the
Yes,
conversation because they go looking for quote unquote experts. And those
that's
experts,
right. Yeah,
unfortunately, depending on who's doing the hiring, they often don't look like us. So
they don't look up.
when you bring in folks from the quote unquote outside, now it's a big, broad world, and you're an artist, so we have influenced everything all over the world. So in
That's
my
right.
mind, that's mostly making what my friend referred to as palaces for the people, right? You make a
Yes,
place, which is why the creative placemaking is so important, because the artists
yes,
are often bringing information to you from all other kinds of influences all over the world, and sometimes those influences or the even the cadences or the other notes might not be, they may not
Yeah.
sound familiar to you, but you will
Yes.
learn that at some point they harmonize somewhere down the line if you're patient. Um,
Exactly.
and that those creative collisions are important, but if you don't value it, you can't really blame other people for seeing the architecture, the design, or the structures and saying, you know what, I studied that and I know what that is. Well, some people who might be also experts in that thing might be around you, but if you leave their voices out of the conversation, if they're not brought into the meetings,
That's right.
and they may sometimes say things that sound goofy to you, but
Yes.
you have to be
Yes.
patient enough to say, well, they're trying to get to something, so
Yes.
allow them some time and space and honor their expertise, because
Yes.
they may not have PhD, whatever behind their name, but they sometimes, more than anybody else, know what they're talking about if you're patient
Right.
and allow them
And
space to express themselves. So
yes.
um, it's a
That's right.
combination, right, of honoring
Yes.
discordant voices that
Yes.
sometimes might not agree with you right away. And listen, we've all been in situations where we thought we were right, and then you listen long enough, it's like, I'm hearing a little bit more about what you're saying now that I've really listened to you, instead of listening long enough just
Yes.
to respond, and you've convinced me. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
it's a combination of being a preservationist and a futurist at the same time, because I work with a lot of young people and I like working with young people.
Hmm.
As I become an old person myself, it's like, well, we don't always know what we're talking about all the time. So it's
Right.
very important to get those voices in the room. And often when I'm there, nobody in the room is under the age of 50. It's like, you're making a mistake. We're not going to be here to see the fruits of all that. So we need to get some younger people that we're building all this for. They need to be in the room, and their
They need to
opinions
be.
may be a little bit more nuanced than yours, or maybe a different vocabulary than yours, but they still need to be here. So
They need to be here.
you have
That's
to
right.
struggle with that mix, and sometimes it's chaotic in the beginning. But I'm okay with that.
Yes. Well, I like to tell the young people I work with, and you probably have thought about this too, that I'm an old dog that learned new tricks.
Right,
You know
right.
what I mean? So don't count me out because you think that since I am the age that I am,
Hmm.
that I won't consider what you're thinking about
Right.
or talking about. Because I knew at one time I was young, and some of
Exactly.
the elders did not want to listen to me.
Exactly.
So I
Exactly.
want to listen to the young people because and work with them. And being a drummer and a musician,
Hmm.
I learn so much from the young people now as well. Even when I'm teaching,
Sure.
sometimes when I'm teaching, a light goes off in my head, and I can't wait to get home to work on something that I was sharing with the student
Mm,
that I didn't think of in that way, just because at that moment
absolutely.
I was thinking about how to help them to understand how to get to the point that they needed to get to in order to execute.
Right. It's the essence of the creative process, I find. So that's why I think those creative spaces are so transformative for communities, because all of those places that we've kind of abandoned, they were almost always either creative places or they had multiple functions, right? They may have been
Yes.
the dance club on one night, and they were jazz club on the next night, and they were this, and then
Yeah.
the Eastern Star would meet there, or something else like that was going on.
Right,
So you
right,
have
right,
that,
right,
that
right.
ferment that's going on all the time. And when you lose those
Exactly.
places where people can just bump into each other and share ideas like
Right.
that, you lose a lot, I find.
Oh yeah.
So
Oh yeah.
almost all of our
Oh
communities had those places. They weren't always ours to begin with. We often took them
yeah.
over after somebody else had abandoned them, but we valued them, and
We valued
and that's
valued it.
part of the
Yes.
problems when you let it deteriorate to the extent that it's no longer able to be restored. We got to the Lincoln Theater in time before it became, a
Woo.
condo. Uh,
Yeah.
and if you've been down there recently, you see there's nothing but condos going on all over there.
That's right. That's
But it
right.
really
It
did
is. Condo.
spur everything else that happened down there really happened because of the subway, Ben's Chili Bowl, and
Yes.
Lincoln Theater. Without those three happening together,
Yeah.
it wouldn't look like that. And you can find that
Well,
scenario in a lot of other cities around the country.
yes. At that time, Ben's Chili Bowl, and I think the other business that's thriving down there now, Lee's
Lee's
Florist.
Flores, right?
Those were the only. See, I don't know all that. I found this out after I moved here to
Okay,
DC. But those were the only. The reason why they've been successful up till now is because they own the real estate.
right.
Anyone
Exactly.
leasing from other people, they own the
Exactly.
real
Couldn't
estate.
move
So
me.
they lease.
If you want me to move, give me $30 million, and I'll go right next door
There
and
it
do it
is.
again. So if you don't own it, you don't
There it
have that
is.
option. That's exactly right.
There it is. And those businesses are still there and they're thriving.
When you first hear this music, my father didn't have a lot of records, but I certainly listened to the music that he was playing. So that's how I know this music. And he was a big Miles head. Um, so when you get older and you're starting to appreciate it on its own, then that music is actually sustaining you generationally. And so I often felt like when I was hearing it, what I thought was the first time, it was also remembering it because it was being played all the time when I was younger. Um, so I may not have always understood it. Like I saw Sun Ra at I
Yeah.
think Unitarian Church or someplace like that on 16th Street when I was in my early 20s. And I was like, what is this brother talking
Hmm.
about? Right. So I was like, what?
And what is
And
he
what is he
wearing?
wearing? And why is he wearing that? Then,
Yeah,
but, three
right.
months later, you had a Parliament concert. They got the same stuff on. You don't think anything of it. It's like, it's just a costume.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
so I think there was more of a closer connection between music, education, and learning. And sometimes I separate
Hmm.
education and learning because we've kind of gotten lost in the soup of styles of
Hmm.
education. But there was an appreciation for learning, and the musicians that I knew were all learned people, right? They studied the craft,
Hmm.
they understood the legacy of what it was they were playing, and I think a lot of that is missed in the age of buying beats. Um, and I don't
Yes.
knock it all because like some of it's quite powerful. That's they eventually find their way back to the source material. But I do worry that they've
Hmm.
lost an appreciation for the source material, right? As the music went to earbuds and headphones, and it's not being played out loud.
Right.
What part of that is actually
Right.
going to transport them when that is something that they're going to need later on when you're struggling with something? Like sometimes I play it when I'm studying or writing, and it sustains me,
Yes.
right? But I can't listen to lyrics when I'm doing that. I need to just hear the music play to
Yeah.
sustain
Here.
my own thought processes. So I do worry
That's
about
right.
that. So I'm so happy to hear what you're doing to bring them back to those essences of the music, so they can
Yes.
get to the scholarship of it, the legacy of
Well,
it.
that's interesting that you would use that word because I tell with my history class on the first day of class, one of the things that I tell them is that this isn't basically
Mm-hmm.
history. This is I'm structuring this class so that you can be a
Mm.
scholar. You need to be a scholar in this music and understand its source and how it started, where it came from, what are the traditional rhythms that you hear in this
Mm-hmm.
music that is a holdover from
Mm-hmm.
Africa. And I prove how the rhythms that we use today are rhythms that come straight out of
Sure.
Africa. I prove it by standing in front of them and showing them what the rhythm is and how the cymbal ride beat that we play on the
Mm-hmm.
cymbal is basically a six beat cymbal or 6 beat phrase that is played but is broken
Mm-hmm.
up. And what we play against it with our left hand, our right foot, and all
Mm.
of that. But that's for another
Mm-hmm.
time. Um, Basically, this music is a music that, like John Coltrane said, it should be a music that if you come to me and you tell me you have an
Mm-hmm.
ailment, I should be able to put together a series of notes and frequencies, whatever you want to call them, that will be directed to the area of your
Mm.
body that needs to feel that those frequencies and the vibrations of those
Sure.
frequencies. And it's already not only has it, I think it's been proven, but they don't want us to know it's been proven, the
Mm-hmm.
scientists, I mean. It's been proven that say, if you hit a cancer cell
Mm-hmm.
with a frequency, it'll
Mm-hmm.
die. It'll die. Um, this is something that's going to be, I guess, opened up later
Hmm.
on for the folks that are left on the
Hmm.
planet after they get rid of the people that they don't want
Hmm.
here. I don't know. I'm being crazy with that thought, but I remember on two occasions. One of them was with a band I was playing with. Have you ever heard of Brother Ah?
Yes.
Well, brother, when I first came to Washington, I worked with Brother Ah for about five
Okay.
years. And the first concert I did with him, we were up in Providence, Rhode Island, doing a concert at Brown University where he taught. And after the concert, a brother came up to us and he said, "Thank you for the music that you played today because before I came to this concert, I was contemplating
Mm.
suicide." Now, the same thing happened many years later with my own
Hmm.
band,
Hmm.
Supernova. Someone came up after the concert and basically said the same thing. They said, "Thank you for the music you played today because earlier I was contemplating
Hmm.
suicide, and now I'm that's not even close to the thing I want
Sure.
to do now. I want to enrich myself with this
Right.
music." And so that told me itself that music is a healing
Sure.
force. And especially if it is coupled with the strongest force in the universe, which is
Hmm.
love. That is the strongest
Hmm.
force in the universe. And when you put those two together, you can heal anything, especially if you put it with repetition.